Our next panel is the buyers panel. We have 3 corporate development professionals with tremendous experience in the industry who are making decisions today about which companies they think are worth the attention of their organizations. And they're also playing political games in order to make deals happen. Games, I won't call them games, I'll call them strategies, pragmatic maneuvering. The Zynga was on this panel last year. They weren't able to participate this year because of the pending IPO, but in a way...
Well, he's out buying somebody right now, so...
I know. They didn't freeze M&A. They just froze public speaking.
Right? Yeah.
They've been watching Salesforce and see what happened there. But yeah, exactly. But I'd like to set the stage for this panel with just a quick thought. For those of us who are married or in committed relationships, when we want to go buy something, we have to think about certain things. If I want to go buy a new phone, I need it for my business. I can just go do it and sort of ask for forgiveness later. If I'm going to buy a sailboat, I better talk to my wife about that and tell her why it's important to my family and get some buy-in. If I'm going to remodel the house, I can't just do it. She might actually notice. I better talk with her about how great it's going to be for our kids and the living space and our family life together. Doesn't sound like it's relevant to M&A, but in fact, when you're a company that's out making acquisitions, you have different categories. You have the small tuck-in that's convenient for a product division that doesn't even arise to board level. Like our deal with Activision, Demonware, they needed control of matchmaking and lobby services for the console, and they could buy it within the budget of an operating division. So it didn't go to a board vote. It was very efficient. On the other hand, for a transformational deal, for a large acquisition, you guys have a lot of work to do because you've got to get everyone on board, from your investors to your management team to shareholders. And so part of our discussion today is going to be around which bucket do you fit in terms of acquisition, size and scale and materiality to the business. And then the second thing I want to focus on, this has come through in a lot of the questions today in the other sessions. I want to focus on the actual negotiating process and the process of getting deals done, because I think there's a lot of bad information out there, and there have been a lot of bad experiences too. But a bad experience becomes a rumor that hits 10 people, and suddenly, the sky is falling. There's a right way to do deals, and the guys who've been doing it for a while and been successful at it understand that, and they can avoid a lot of those problems. They're not out to get you. They're out to make a good deal that works for everybody. And so what we're doing here on the buyers panel is opening the black box and getting some insight into how that decision process works and how that deal process works. But as a starting point, and for some context for the panel, I'd like to invite the panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves, and I'll start closest.
Sure. Chris Petrovich. I run the digital ventures group at GameStop, charged with architecting and executing the corporate digital strategy for the company, mostly through external opportunities, which means going out and bringing in opportunities through investment, acquisition, and strategic partnership. I have a colleague that is the other side of the digital coin that actually operates our digital platform and our digital business, which a lot of these acquisitions and partnerships get integrated into. So we've worked very closely with him and his team as we analyze and do due diligence and things of that nature and work on integration. So we'll get more into that and the importance of that later.
And you used to work for John Steinberg over at Rustic Canyon, correct?
No.
I did.
No, sorry.
You did. Okay, I'm mixing my guys up. Thanks.
And I'm Josh Iguato. I run corporate development at MindJolt. For those of you that don't know, MindJolt is a developer and publisher of casual, social, and mobile games. We're a relatively new player in the space. We've been around for about a year and a half. Sort of the basis of our company has been on a three-pillar strategy of mobile, social, and casual, and we've just done basically a roll-up over the last year and a half to make that happen. So we've done 4 acquisitions that are somewhat sizable and a few other smaller tuck-in acquisitions over the past year and a half. But we're growing very, very quickly, but still a mid-sized player. In terms of my personal background, I have a pretty long history of corporate development. I was at companies like MTV, Univision, News Corp most recently, and joined Krista Wolf and 3 other partners to found MindJolt, raise the money, and sort of to jump in on this adventure right now.
Josh Grant, I'm in RockU. Started about 6 months ago to head up corporate development strategy. We've done 3 acquisitions in the past 9 months or so, and 5 sort of corporate distribution type deals. And now excited to announce that we're building a publishing business to publish and distribute third-party IP. Prior to prior to RockU, I've been an operator, been an investor and a banker, so I've seen kind of transactions, successful ones and not so successful ones from the operator perspective, the investor perspective, and the advisor perspective.
Great. You worked for Rich Rosenblatt.
I did.
So now I'm getting, yeah.
And Hugh Hefner too, but.
Really? Well, let's talk about that. Great. Thanks for the introductions. I'm going to start with just a general question in terms of how your companies identify transactions and figure out which deals merit attention. And obviously there are a lot of different models. In a very large company like a Microsoft, you have operating divisions that identify strategic areas and they kind of float things up. In other companies, the corp dev seat is also a strategy seat, and you're figuring out where the company should go and actually finding stuff, and then there's reactive. How does that work for your company?
Yeah, so I think you'll hear some different responses to a lot of questions from myself versus the guys to my left here, just by the very nature of who we are as a company. You know, first and foremost, being publicly traded, you know, Fortune 250 company, there's different factors and considerations that go into our thinking around acquisitions that are different from these guys that, quite candidly, can move a lot more nimbly on things. But then again, the scale at which we're looking at things is probably different as well, by virtue of the fact that we're creating a roadmap for ourselves that requires us to be very transformational. So, you know, a lot of the things that we're looking at, by nature, have to help move that transformational needle. But to set a bit of context, you know, when I joined in 2009, the company did not have any digital folks in the organization. Literally, I mean, the people that were running GameStop.com, which you could consider a digital property, were people from the merchandising department that used to source games from EA and Activision, and treated it as an outlet for games that weren't selling in our stores. So, you know, there were presentations and pitches and business plans put in front of them about, you know, owning and operating a digital distribution platform, getting into, you know, new business models and things of that nature. Just kind of went by the wayside because the right people weren't looking and thinking about things in the right way and didn't have that, you know, that future focus. So, you know, there were a lot of things that happened in our organization that kind of forced them to acknowledge that we needed this kind of a group and needed it to be outside of the corporate headquarters in Dallas, which is another, you know, important, not insignificant factor that a lot of companies don't embrace, is to kind of realize that all roads don't lead to where they are. And so they allowed me the opportunity to build it in California, build a small team, and you know, have access to the company's free cash flow on an annual basis, which is, you know, sizable. And you know, we've earmarked a certain amount of money for investments and acquisitions, you know, annually, and we're allowed to go beyond that if it makes business sense for the company. But our decision-making process is, for a Fortune 250 company, it's 5 people. It's not multiple committees, and in many cases, it's not the board, other than the fact that our senior staff have a great relationship with the board, so we'll pick up the phone and call them on anything that we do. But it's literally myself, the chairman, the president, the CEO, and the CFO that sit in a room, and the head of our GameStop digital business, that sit in a room on a monthly basis and review these things and make decisions pretty quickly. So for a big organization, it is relatively flat. And, you know, in 18 months, we've done 4 acquisitions. Those are just the ones that we've executed on. There have been many, many more that never crossed the finish line. So I'm very pleased with the way in which a big company like this, especially a traditional company that's being looked at as a dinosaur, is embracing the need to think differently and change. And you know, it really just is the way that big companies need to be, otherwise they are going to be left behind. So I think you know, we're a business school case study, as I was telling one of the guys outside, and it'll be interesting to see how we come out on the other side.
Yeah, it's amazing how rare it is. Blockbuster.
Oof.
Game over. GameStop, 4 digital acquisitions, a digital division, a presence in the next generation.
And some analogies to Netflix recently, which by analysts, which is,
Yeah, great.
we're halfway there.
Take
Yeah.
that.
Take that all day long. Yeah.
We have a long way to go, believe me.
Josh, what about for your situation, Josh Igato?
Yeah, so we're a much smaller organization, so what's really key for us is to be able to move very, very quickly. So the majority of our acquisitions don't end up happening in sort of like a typical banker kind of sell-side process. Most of the acquisitions we end up doing, one of the 4 founders has a relationship with someone who's selling, or there's someone we're working with that we have a really good relationship with, and they're looking for strategic opportunities. For instance, the SGN acquisition we did about a month and a half ago, we had a long relationship with Shervin, who was the founder of SGN. He was looking at doing something different, and we just made it. We were able to turn around in a month and make the deal happen. Whereas, I think oftentimes there's a whole process that can take 2 to 3 months in other types of organizations. So, I guess sourcing deals is kind of a one-on-one personal process. It's sometimes with the smaller tuck-in acquisitions, it comes from the particular operating groups, where if there's a development shop we're working with that's really great, or if there's a site we're working with that we think is really amazing, the folks who work with them on a day-to-day basis will bring it up to the management team. And then the transformational deals, it's just sort of what do we see in the marketplace and what are the opportunities. So.
Let me ask a question before we move on to Josh Grant. You have 4 founders who are well connected in the industry. You're doing deals with guys you know from prior lives, but you're not big enough to make team bets. You're just not.
To make what bet?
To bet on a team.
Oh.
Don't care what business they're in. We know they're good. We'll pay what we have to pay them, and then we'll repurpose them on something else. That's a Google game. That's not a. You're not there yet. So, what is the next stage when someone says, "I've been talking to this guy for a while. I know he's good. He's in this business." How do you get consensus among the management that that makes sense to do the deal?
Gosh, so I think there's a couple different parts to what you just described. The first one is, although we can't make bets just on a management team per se, in terms of sort of maybe dishing out as much cash as some other folks can, I think if the partner really believes in the strategic opportunity and sees the upside of working with us, equity can also play a role in a particular deal. And so that actually enables us to get some pretty big deals done that you wouldn't think necessarily would be able to close on very quickly. In terms of getting everyone on the same page, in terms of the management team, we all work very, very closely. We're all friends. We started this from the very beginning together, so it's not typically that hard to get our management team on the same page. And we also work very closely with our VC. Austin Ventures funded our company, and they've been fantastic to work with. So, knock on wood, so far, we've been able to find targets that make a ton of sense for us, and it hasn't been that hard to be able to sort of get everyone on the same page to get it closed.
Josh.
Oh, sure.
Josh Grant, interested to hear from you. You're sort of sitting in the middle. You guys, you've raised over $100 million now from Sequoia, SoftBank, some of the deepest pockets in the industry.
It's a lot of money.
How does it work for you guys? And have you spent it all yet?
I haven't spent it all yet, thankfully. I think, was it the question on where the
process. How do you source deals?
Sure.
How do you get consensus? And how do you turn the ship?
So my perspective are my favorite deals and the ones that move quickest, the easiest, and most efficient are the ones that are operator-led, right? I think RockU prides itself on being kind of an operator in a P&L-driven company. We're pretty light on the exec level, and a lot of the decision-making and the style, and this kind of comes from Lisa's background and the background of the other execs, is really to empower the leadership in the different P&L businesses. So what I've found that gets traction at RockU are things that are actionable and tangible and provide immediate value today, at the operator level or the P&L level for the business, and that things that are a year down the road or require a year to be proven out, that come from pushed down from the board or inbound from a banker or another firm, that it's very tough to get operator buy-in for those deals, particularly when there's so much opportunity just in executing tactically day to day, right? So maybe that will change over time as we get bigger or as our core markets change. But right now, I think the deals that work the best for us are really sponsored from the people holding the P&L, so the media business or the owned and operated games business, or hopefully soon the publishing business. And I will take issue with your not big enough to make team bets point. So we do make team bets, and I think ultimately, regardless of the P&L of the game or the studio or the company that we're acquiring or partnering with, ultimately it's a team bet. We acquired a studio in Australia earlier this year called Three Blokes, and they had some great early traction with their first game on Facebook. The developers are just rock stars and have been in the game business for 20 plus years at many large companies, and so we knew there was a strong track record on prior platforms and a really strong management and design sense, and we're getting some early traction with their first title. But ultimately, this was a team bet that they could grow and expand the studio and that we could support their creative vision. So I would say that, I'd like to believe that we are in the business of making team bets.
So let's follow that thread. To the extent you're comfortable talking about how you actually structure deals, key people at the heart of all these transactions, especially one like the one you just described, how do you think about structuring a deal to make sure they stick around?
Sure.
Let's start with you on that.
Sure. So, to use this one specifically, the company, true to its name, Three Blokes, it was literally three blokes, right? And so they had, through sweat equity and some help from contractors, they had launched their first title. But it really was a team of three, and obviously were any of them to leave or be unhappy or not motivated, that would have a significant impact on the business. So the first part is like any relationship, marriage or otherwise business related, it's about building the relationship and the foundation of trust and respect, and determining if there's a shared vision. And if there is a shared vision, then it becomes, well, what is the right instrument to execute it against that vision? Sometimes that's an investment, sometimes it's a commercial deal, a distribution or publishing deal, and then at times it can be an acquisition. So we look at the team and the vision first, and then we look at M&A or publishing or investment as the tool, trying to select among or use those tools to our mutual advantage to execute against that vision. So obviously everyone's familiar with the traditional forms of retention. They can be equity, which vests over a period of time. It can be performance-based. You hit certain milestones over a certain period of time, then you get X, Y, and Z. There are also typical holdbacks for satisfaction of reps and warranties in the transaction. So there are 3 or 4 different tools that can be used for retention. That being said, if you do a deal and you don't, we do a deal and we don't live up to our promise and we create a shitty situation, people aren't going to stick around, or worse, they stick around and they twiddle their thumbs, right, and they wait for their lockup to expire and they get their cash and they take off, and that's sort of the worst situation, right? So I think the best way to ensure success is for the acquirer or the partner to live up to what we sell. And we've got to do that every day, and that's our responsibility, is to live that every day. And then you'll create an environment where people want to stick around.
I mean, somewhat similar to what Josh said. It's in almost every acquisition we've made, the management team is really, really important to us, and in every case they've been integrated into our own team. And in terms of the deal specifically, which I think you asked about, we do believe in giving the entrepreneur a second bite at the apple. So, in every case there'll be, whatever it is, an initial transaction consideration, but there'll be an opportunity for upside as long as they continue to be involved in the organization. So, That's great.
I want to ask all the panelists to sort of lean into the mic and talk into the mics. Let me, Chris, let me spin the question slightly differently. You know, for the other panelists, they're relatively small, growing quickly, high value in equity, high perceived value in equity. You're a startup within an established public company. Does that change how you have to think about deal structure? Is equity less of a consideration?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's pretty simple. I mean, our finance guys really like to keep it at the baseline level of cash being king. And, you know, I think because of the nature of our company and the profile of it, you know, the promise of equity, whether it's smoke and mirrors or not, just, you know, it isn't as much of a you know, reality. I mean, it's a pretty, you know, stable stock that has stayed within certain ranges for a while now. And I think, you know, for us, you know, we like to just provide the folks with cash and then a second bite of the apple with more cash if they hit certain milestones. You know, again, going back to the nuances of being a public company, you know, there's reporting requirements that you have in, you know, in my group that these guys don't have about how you treat things from an expense perspective, right? And as long as you have some time-based component to the retention, it's treated as compensation expense as opposed to some other kind of expense. So that, you know, kind of goes into a larger formula around, you know, whether the deal is accretive or dilutive and all sorts of things that give our finance folks hives that I really don't give a shit about, really. But you know, they're the ones that have to talk about it on the quarterly calls. So, you know, we try and keep it as simple as possible. I think, you know, at the same time, we also find people that are aligned with us culturally and aren't really just in it for the, you know, the quick single bite at the apple, knowing that they'll never be around long enough for the second one. And so you see that happen way too often. And, you know, I think when we do due diligence on companies, I think the interpersonal relationships are probably at the top of our filter list of things that we go through. If we don't feel the sincerity of the folks, if we don't jive with them culturally, it just isn't going to work regardless of how great of an opportunity it is. So, you know, a lot of people come into our environment realizing the benefits that we can provide to them while still giving them their freedom to behave as entrepreneurs. And I think for those of you that sat in on the sellers panel and heard Emily Greer from Congregate talk, I think you probably heard a lot of that, which is, you know, the antithesis of what other companies in our space do when they acquire certain social gaming companies or certain casual game publishers or certain mobile companies. You know, we don't try and push them into the corporate Borg, so to speak, right out of the gate. We kind of allow them to do their thing and come to us whenever they need our assistance. But really, cash is king, you know, for the most part in our, you know, from our deals, and you know, equity plays a pretty minor role.
Yeah. So, Chris, what was it really like working for Hugh Hefner?
That'll be the next panel.
Okay.
That's a happy hour. Yeah,
All right. So we've talked a little bit about how you decide to move forward on transactions and how you worry or think about keeping the team on board. Let's talk about the actual process of negotiating a deal, negotiating terms. And let me just start with the open question to the panel. What are some of the red flags that immediately warn you off of a deal? You hear about a company, you get on a conference call, or you go to the first meeting. What are some of the things that say, warning, there be dragons, let's move on to the next one?
The big V, right? The valuation, the perception that the people on the other side of the table have of themselves relative to the market and relative to their own business as it compares to the market. You know, we try to stay pretty disciplined in that regard, again, for a lot of the reasons that I mentioned before around being a public company and how things have to be a net positive on the books for us as much as possible. And, you know, when you go into a situation and somebody is pitching you their vision and asking for a price tag that is based on the promise of revenue as opposed to real revenue that already exists, that gets a little bit makes us a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
Because it's just a harbinger of things to come from that person in that group, as opposed to really understanding who we are as a company, having done the research on us as much as we've done the research on them to understand how they can provide a benefit to us and more importantly, how we can provide benefit to them. And, you know, for better or for worse, we're in a sector in the digital media space that's probably one of the frothiest categories out there. And so, you know, we are probably likely in many competitive bidding situations, probably never gonna win out, and that's okay. But I think that's really the big red flag for me when that becomes a point of disagreement out of the gate.
Yeah, and there are two things there. I've sat in your seat before, and there are two things that are certain. One is if you overpay based on this inflated expectation and then it doesn't pan out, they're going to blame it on you because you didn't execute well. And the second thing is, I know as a seller's representative, if I go in to you with a ridiculous valuation, life's too short. You're going to move on to the next opportunity. Sure. So, okay, valuation. Any others? Red flags, deal killers, right up front.
I'd say for us, when we get a big killer is when representations are made, in the opening and presentations or early discussions, and then when we dig into the numbers, we find out that things are kind of materially different from how they've been represented. That's usually a walkaway point for us. And you would think, given how transparent the business has become, that people wouldn't do that, but you still see that, and whether it's intentional or not, whether they know or not, they just don't know their business, or they're actually making false representations. Whatever it is, it's not good. So, much better to be honest about what you know and what you have versus what you expect and what you believe will happen, right?
I would say this: if you don't know, bring in somebody that can help you.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it doesn't matter how big or small you are. I guess within reason, there are certain folks that will be too expensive for you to engage with. But through your network and through the industry, you should be able to find folks that would be more than happy to help you as they build their business and help you with yours. And the first thing you need to do in these processes is understand that you acknowledge that you're not going to know everything, and you're not going to go through it unless you've been a career M&A person and feel like you can do it yourself. I think ask for help, whether it's your lawyers, whether it's somebody on the financial side, whether it's an advisor.
For example. Yeah.
There you go. I was waiting for that. Yeah. That's what I would say.
It was a softball. I wasn't
we found it much easier to work with folks that have some kind of help, formal or informal, just because those folks can be an objective source of information and guidance, and quite frankly can play good cop, bad cop, as these things go, and you can use them to your advantage. I think one of the worst things I can see is when negotiations directly with the principals get so contentious that you start having deal fatigue and wondering whether you still want to be in bed with this person.
So remember,
Right.
Yeah,
everyone
I agree
remembers
with
when
that.
WikiLeaks broke, and suddenly we're hearing about how mainland China actually views North Korea. And it eliminated probably 10 years of bad, painful diplomacy based on asymmetry of information, inadvertent. What I like to see in deals is symmetry of knowledge and information. No one who's good at this and who's been at it for a while is trying to take advantage of anyone else. We're basically trying to fully understand the issues and then negotiate something that everyone understands. And where you get surprises is where there's either a culture of exaggeration. Oh, we're about a $10 million company. Actually, we're 7.8, but it sounds better to say about, yeah. There's just either a culture of inflation or just a lack of understanding of the implications of data. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to add one more thing where we'll typically look at sort of the recent history of the company, and if there's a history of executives cycling out or even through the deal, sort of no willingness to continue to be involved with the company or have some aspect of the deal continue to be tied to the performance of the company, it scares us a little bit. It's not always a requirement, but if you don't believe in the company you're selling enough to sort of tie something to it, it sometimes raises some red flags for us. So.
Yeah.
And on the process itself, specifically, right? So most deals, have a typical flow, right? There's, an NDA, and just in terms of documentation, right? There's an NDA, and then there's an LOI or an MOU or a term sheet, and then you kind of, move forward to, stock purchase agreement in different forms of long form. My one piece of advice would be, and we've seen this over and over and over again, like the biggest hang up, once you get past, validating the team and validating the numbers and getting a term sheet or an LOI in place, the biggest hang up out there is companies that want a stock transaction and versus willingness to do an asset deal. And the implications on the reps and warranties, particularly for small independent companies, literally can add months to the deal and tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars in legal bills. And it's, if there's any way that, if you are kind of considering selling or positioning yourself for sale, really kind of work with your advisor, your lawyer, to understand the difference and understand the implications on going with an asset transaction versus going to a purchase, and the implications on the reps and warranties, because it's really, really complex and can kill
Does everyone
very many
understand?
deals.
I'll say that alone is reason enough to get help, right? If you didn't understand what he said,
Yeah.
go get professional assistance on helping you understand that.
It's a critical point. If you're an S corp, stay that way. If you have contracts that require permission to transfer, go fix them. This is an area that's exactly what we were talking about, asymmetry of information.
Yeah.
Often a junior corp dev guy at a buyer will agree to a stock purchase without understanding the implications, and now they're going to have to renegotiate price because of depreciation recapture. Yeah, that's a great point.
And one other, while we're giving our 2 cents on advice and suggestions, one other thing that I would say that you never can underestimate is the amount of time suck that a transaction will be for you, big or small, relative to how that's going to distract you from running your business. And all too often you see these deals that take a few months, from beginning to end, and even in those 2 months, the principals are so ensconced in the process without getting help that the numbers start to decline. People start getting a little bit fidgety and antsy. Is this deal going to happen? Is it not? We're not paying attention to the business, and that decline inevitably continues kind of post-deal, because then you're into the integration phase, right? Then I have to deal with the new company's HR. I got to deal with the new company's payroll. I got to do this. I got to do that, and so the more that you can get help around you to help not only with the blocking and tackling, but help give you the bandwidth to stay focused on your business, I think that'll be a win-win for both sides of the table, because you start seeing the numbers go down and you're into month 2 of negotiating or finalizing the deal, and all of a sudden the buyer could just say, hey, this is a red flag in and of itself. It establishes deal fatigue, and people start questioning the rationale for the deal, and then it's pointing fingers, who caused it and why. So the more you can keep yourself free from that within reason, obviously you still need to be engaged in the process, but it's a fine line, and it's a really tricky dance sometimes.
So we started with red flags up front, and we took a really interesting step into challenges at the next phase of the deal. Some of the things that you guys, unreasonable valuation expectations, misleading or just missing information, blind insistence on a stock transaction without really understanding what that means. Well, let's take another step into the deal now and talk about deal killers. All right? So everyone is reasonably happy, the transaction's moving forward, and then surprise, something comes up and it kills the deal. And either a surprise because it's something new that happens, or a surprise, something that wasn't disclosed because the seller maybe didn't think it was important, but it is important. We're focused here on the minefield and navigating the minefield, but frankly, that's where we should be focused, because when you go into this, you want to understand where the mines are. So any thoughts on that?
Just to agree with you, that I think those are the 2 most likely issues that are going to blow up a deal, is seeing something or something being disclosed. This has happened to us a couple times that, either is positioned as they didn't think it was a big deal, or maybe it was not disclosed purposefully, but either way, it's something that, even if there's no financial impact, there could be a legal impact.
What's an example of one of those things? And it doesn't have to be from a real situation, but what are some of the things people should be thinking about?
Maybe a prior business that's part of that has been closed but still has outstanding issues associated with it. Maybe legal actions that haven't sort of officially been taken care of but haven't sort of raised their head recently. I don't know, what else?
Sort of employee, departures, did they take, code, or, was there, is the IP protected? A lot of issues around, IP and former employees, who have left the business. We've seen those many times, and that can be quite tricky to work through. But yeah, just to echo the comments, I mean, disclose early, over disclose. I mean, once you get past, once you get to the point where you've got at least the terms, the major terms agreed to, and now you're in the heavy, diligence phase. I mean, disclose everything.
It's going to come out.
It's going to come
anyway.
out. Yeah. Just do it early, and you'll generate a lot of good faith that way, and you'll find that the buyer is oftentimes more than willing to work through those issues, and will appreciate the candor and being upfront.
Felonies or sex tapes? If you can avoid those after the acquisition, that'd be tremendous.
Keep them under wraps.
Yeah, that's
Lock
right.
them away. Okay, so the 11th hour surprise, encumbrance of IP, skeletons in the closet. Let's shift gears and talk about some of the things that make a business attractive in your market, where you have that first call or that first meeting and you say, hey, these guys are onto something. I want to learn more.
Yeah, so I'll use Congregate as an example, since they're a persistent presence here at Casual Connect and one of our first acquisitions. When we were thinking about who we wanted to be and what we wanted to learn better in this organization, when we first started my division, it was all about better understanding where gamers were gaming and better understanding business models that we weren't participating in that were monetizing that gameplay. And so obviously, we all know the macros around free-to-play. We know the macros around playing on different connected devices. And we understood by doing the research that our core gamers weren't just playing console games anymore, right? So where were they going? And more importantly than that, were they going to platforms that were philosophically aligned with who we are and who we were as a company, which was a distributor of other people's content as opposed to a creator of that content? And not to say that the latter would never be interesting to us, but just given where we were in the life cycle of our thinking about the company, it was about, can we find a version of GameStop that exists on the web that caters to a male-centric audience, that provides, more core gameplay, beyond kind of what I'll call mid-core, kind of beyond the traditional casual stuff, and that really is content agnostic. Because that was close to who we are, what our DNA was. And I think if we would have gone out and acquired a AAA game developer, that would have just totally been wrong. And if we would have invested in a highly overvalued cloud gaming company at the time that was asking us to invest, that would have been totally wrong, because that was going to be our first foot out of the door. So for us, it was finding a company that was on a business and philosophical level aligned with who we are, and also gave us new thinking, new talent, new leadership that we didn't have internally before, and allowed us to get smarter about new business models and new ways of monetizing customers that were playing games. Now, that's a very unique answer to us that probably doesn't apply as much to these guys.
But if we abstract your answer, what you're really saying is, when you saw a company that really was aligned with your strategy and where you wanted to be in 2 years, that caught your attention.
Correct. It's a very efficient way of saying my long-winded answer.
No, but it's interesting, and it's something for everyone to think about. I think every growing company should think 2 years ahead and think about who should acquire them and why, and think through those arguments, because you're a top 250 publicly traded company with a lot of money to spend and the ability to actually move markets and create channels. Someone else who understands that and can be a significant part of that could be strategically valuable to you if they play their cards right.
And I will say, not to beat a dead horse here, but the brother-sister that founded the company, Jim and Emily, salt of the earth people, that the folks that we really connected with and really felt were genuinely passionate about growing this business under our umbrella. And we saw other companies in their space where we really didn't feel that same way. So even though the attributes of those other companies were almost identical and perhaps even better on a pro forma basis, really the intangibles around the people were the deciding factor for us.
So for us, it's really, it's pretty basic. Our goal is to get really amazing games and really great content in front of as many people as possible. And so the sort of nuance to it is what defines a really great game and how you can get it in front of more people, which for us means, finding games that work with mobile distribution, that work across social networks, and will also work on our standalone websites. It's harder than you think, and it's not always in the places you think it's going to be. So, for example, about 2 months ago, we acquired a casual games company called Hall Pass Media. A big chunk of their traffic is actually, games I wouldn't necessarily define as great games, or I wouldn't have before, like dress-up style, cooking games, like very simple games that, you know, attract huge audiences of girls that we would have never identified beforehand. It's actually great content that's mostly only found on websites right now. There was a huge opportunity to also bring it to mobile and to bring it to social networks. And so, you know, it's an example of finding great content where you don't necessarily think of great content being. And so we're constantly trying to find that great content and monetize it and distribute it in as many ways as possible. And then the second thing, to reiterate your point, is finding amazing people to work with. And every company we've acquired, it's just absolutely amazing people that we're excited to work with every day, and continue to have great ideas, because you know, they're an asset that's going to continue to build new businesses within your company. You're not just buying the one asset you're getting day one. So I think those are the two things we really look for.
Yeah.
What do we look for? So, you know, there's a lot out there now in how, you know, social games and whether on, you know, Facebook or on iOS, other platforms, you know, we're moving away from traditionally a packaged product business into, you know, you guys have all heard this is more of a service business, right? And we're moving away from largely a predictive model to more of an iterative one, which is interesting because many of the best game designers and developers out there from the traditional markets are now, you know, having to make this pivot. And to be both great creative thinkers and designers, you need to have a core narrative and core creative concept that works. But you also need to be flexible and realistic enough to realize that the iterating after you launch, you know, it's no longer shipping, right? It's first launch and then, you know, tune, tweak, iterate, test, A/B, et cetera, as you step on the gas on distribution and user acquisition and marketing. And so finding teams that understand that conceptually, that believe in that model, that understand the balance between where strong narrative comes into play and strong creative is still important, but also understanding that you know, in the execution is an inherent iterative model. And that's something that we hope we can bring to our studio partners, whether they have been acquired or would be acquired, or whether it's more of a commercial publishing deal, is to allow them to focus on the creative execution, where we can bring these iterative and kind of infrastructure services to play to change the scale, hopefully, of success.
I'm going to just pause for a moment and invite anyone in the audience who has a question for the panelists to go ahead and pose it. Yes?
Tim Merrill, DigiCapital, we're a games investment bank. In the light of Gree, OpenFaint, Tencent, Riot Games, and DNA and Gmoko, does that make tailored deals where there's really strong strategic value in both directions more important for you to be able to compete for really great companies?
What do you mean tailored deals?
There are processes where basically you go and speak to everybody, and you're one of many, and therefore at the end of the day you pay the most or you don't get the deal. There are deals where you've got a really strong benefit to them, they've got a really strong benefit to you, and therefore actually you might negotiate, say, a better term sheet with a low valuation because there's so much value in both directions. Does that, if you're competing against a Tencent where clearly they're a very strong position, does that make that sort of really focused deal more important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say really quickly, for most of the targets we've ended up acquiring, it's happened because there's a lot of strategic value between what we do and between sort of who they are and what they do. If it were a straight up sort of who can pay more, that's not a sort of a battle we're looking to get into, and I think with a Tencent or someone like that, obviously we're going to lose. We're more thinking about what's the long-term vision. Can we make this into something that's 2 or 3 times bigger than it is now, or maybe many times more than that? And so we try to structure the deals basically in a way that everyone participates in upside. We're small enough that there's going to be a lot of room for growth in our equity. And so most of the folks we're working with are looking for the strategic value we can bring to the table, and then the upside of being part of something that's going to have grow at a much faster multiple than someone else who's just going to give them cash up front.
So from our perspective, we've been kind of lucky, and I hope we continue the streak of all 4 acquisitions that we made were ones that we pursued and not ones that were pitched to us, because we had very specific needs, and perhaps we got lucky in that our specific needs maybe weren't the specific needs of other people in the game space because they either already had those needs filled or they didn't need those things at all. So Congregate was not looking to be sold. Impulse, the digital distribution platform we bought, was not looking to be sold. The streaming technology company Spawn Labs that we bought in Austin, Texas, was not looking to be sold. But we identified areas of opportunity where we wanted to either have more expertise, needed ownership of a platform, or just wanted to be more cognizant of the threats and opportunities that an enabling technology can provide us. So those are very different dynamics as opposed to getting a knock on the door from an investment banker saying, I've got this client that you need to make a decision in 2 weeks because I have a term sheet on the table. We usually just don't even return those calls because we're not going to win. And you can see by virtue of recent deals what competitive bidding does, and in some cases the competitive bidding is just to raise the price as opposed to a statement of genuine interest in the company so that they know that somebody else paid more. And that's just not a game that we're going to play. I mean, we have too much public exposure to do those kinds of things, and fortunately, we're not in a position to need to do that.
Let me lob in one just quick question here, especially since most of the audience are with smaller emerging companies. It feels like this industry is maturing. Zynga's going to raise $1 billion, Playdom is part of Disney, Apple's flexing their muscles in the channel, Facebook has tremendous control over channel. Is this a good time for people to be starting companies in this industry? Is there room for the small guy to innovate and still create a lot of value?
I think so, as long as you're not going into a pool that's already flooded with 800-pound gorillas. There have been some talks at this conference about different categories within the broad kind of social casual space that have yet to be explored. I think those are interesting. Different genres, different styles of gameplay. I think for us, we're staying true to the core gamer that likes better production value games that monetizes, quite frankly, exponentially better than any of the folks that play Zynga or other games. We use really, and it doesn't have to be, they don't have to be 10 to 20 to $50 million budget games either. We really believe that there's an audience that people have turned away from almost too much, which is that that male demo, because they believe that male demo only wants to play $60 games on their PC or on their console. And the reality is that that's not the truth, and they want to play on the web, they want to play on their tablets, they want to play on their smartphones, but nobody outside of the current crop of publishers is really addressing those needs, and all they're doing is kind of repurposing their IP. I don't want to say nobody, but not to any great significance. So I think, remember who are the people that are spending a lot of money on games and have historically spent and will continue to spend, and as opposed to, following the path that others have charted, and they've already kind of burned that bridge from the perspective of new entrants. And I think just being creative about new untapped markets. Sean Ryan from Facebook gave a good talk about all those different categories from his biased perspective for Facebook. He's pleading for more variety of games on his platform, and I think that sentiment plays out on the broader kind of open web and on other connected devices, not just on Facebook. I think there's great opportunity, just not if you're going to be a Me Too.
Yep.
Yeah, I think if you're a developer who has an innovative concept or has something great about a game that you're creating, you should absolutely create it, because there's always, people are always going to find that game one way or another. But responding to your question of sort of the behemoths in the space, and do you worry about, you know, Google blocking you or Facebook blocking you or Apple causing problems? You know, there's pros and cons to working with these huge distribution channels which have amazing leverage in the space, and our approach has always been one of diversification. And, you know, we try to get as many as our games across multiple platforms as we can. And if, you know, virality or monetization or some aspect of making a game successful is tougher in one channel, we feel like we're going to be able to make it a success in one of these other channels. So we try to spread it around a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so, or we're in the wrong business.
Yeah.
I'd say sort of more specifically, it is true that the production values, budgets, number of devs per team, length of dev cycles, amount of money required to grow a game, you know, all these things are true and are realities, and in some sense, you know, could burden a developer if they were trying to do everything soup to nuts. And I think that's one of the reasons why we decided to build out our publishing business, is to really let the developer, particularly the independent developer, focus on core gameplay and focus on the creative, and let us help on the infrastructure and the services aspect of the business. So we're very excited about what that can mean at scale, both for RockU and for the independent developer. You know, I don't know many developers out there that said, hey, I really got in this business to build out a 12-person QA team. Right? That's probably not their motivation. So you know, come on board with us, and you can leverage ours. But you know, specifically about where, you know, what is exciting at the highest level, at least from my perspective. I mean, one, you know, more people are playing games now on more platforms and channels than ever before, right? And that's, you know, that's very exciting. And many people who would not consider themselves gamers are actually engaging in behavior that we would have 5 years ago really just said, you know, that type of behavior you will only see from a 24-year-old male, and now we're seeing it from, you know, younger and older females. So that's exciting. No one has really cracked a relevant and persistent IP experience across platforms and channels yet at scale. So I think there's opportunity there. And then lastly, the role of brands and entertainment companies has not been, you know, really fleshed out or solidified in social, whether it's, you know, your typical online social platforms or mobile. So we think there's an exciting opportunity there. So those are three areas where we think, you know, no one's won, and there's significant growth opportunities. But you know, we have to face and recognize the realities that the business is certainly becoming more expensive to operate if you're an independent developer trying to do everything yourself.
Yeah, the two trends that are interesting there in my question are the channel, you know, the strength of the Facebook iOS channel, and the budgets. When I was at Activision 15 years ago, we had budgets on console games that we're seeing now on casual. But one of the exciting things about this area is there's no barrier between you and your customers. If you create great content, you can find them. So we have time for another question from the audience, if anyone has anything they'd like to ask our panelists. You guys are good. You covered everything.